And this is, if we're used to growing corn and soy on a large scale, the hazelnut has the same nutritional profile as soy, and chestnut has the same nutritional profile as corn. So we can grow perennial carbohydrate crops without having to do row crops, annuals, with all the fertilizer that we need to bring in every year. I showed this picture a little bit before. This is a little more detail. Earlier this year we got the go-ahead at work, so what are you doing at work? If you have space at work, we have 40 acres of space that we're growing some lawn on. If you have space at work, maybe you live in an apartment or a condo and you can't grow a garden, well, there are community gardens you can use, but what about work? Why could you not use all this land that all of our businesses or churches have to grow some food? So you'll notice this is kind of on the back side of the building because people weren't really sure what was going to happen with this garden. So what we did is we put in the top right picture, there are 6 fruit trees up there that we're actually going to espalier, which means they're going to grow along almost like grapevines. We can do fruit the same way. There's a lot of perennial flowers there, and then we put in a lot of annuals to fill in spaces while these perennials are establishing themselves. So I imagine that this will eventually move to the front of the building once they see what it can be. This building is actually designed to look like a farm. It sits in Holland, Michigan, which isn't a big farming community. So I think having the gardens and that tie-in back to farming is really key. If you live in an urban area, we're seeing, we heard the talk about Detroit and urban gardens. There are 2 pictures that are on the top of the screen. That is downtown Chicago. One picture is looking one way and one picture is turning around and looking the other way. This is growing food right on asphalt. You see some trees there. They just imported fertilizer from a horse barn that was right in downtown Chicago. They built soil via compost, and they're growing in this poor community. They're growing community gardens and lots of food and fruit for the local people right in downtown Chicago. The other direction that you're seeing, which is a lot of white houses, those are the bee houses. This is the Chicago Honeybee Co-op. So they have an entire honey production right here in Chicago. The bottom picture is Rome, Italy. If anyone's been to Rome and walked the streets are lined with orange trees that you can just reach up and pick while you're there. And Bill Mollison is fond of saying, why are we planting in our urban areas and suburban areas useless ornamental species of plants when we could be planting beneficial food species of plants? These plants still look pretty, they still flower, and they give food. So why are we not doing more of this? It's just a snapshot of a suburban residential neighborhood in Davis, California. This is called Village Homes. And you can see, the kids can play in the streets. There's food they can go pick. These homes sell at a premium. There's a farmer that actually comes to take care of this area and get some of his income from selling the food here that the residents don't take. This is something we can do everywhere. The homes sell for more money. It's a very local food system. So this is definitely something we have a lot of access to here in Michigan. The bottom is actually a picture from right up here near Traverse City in Michigan. It's a very energy efficient, almost passive home, so it doesn't have to use a big heating and air conditioning system, if one at all, for most of the year. If you do have a lawn, instead of using a lawnmower that's using gas and needs maintenance and repair, maybe you could have sheep or goats. You can get secondary benefits. Not only can you get a nice lawn that stays fertilized, but you can get wool or have some lamb in your freezer. The bottom picture is my townhome that I used to live in, so I was trying to see, if I live in a townhome, I don't have a garden, how much food can I grow? So there's tomatoes, peppers, flowers, and squash. The squash can grow vertical. It doesn't necessarily have to grow horizontal. So you kind of see in the background a little slatted wood staked in piece where the squash can grow vertically. So permaculture, again, taking advantage of vertical, not just horizontal growing space. And again, the largest user of water in the United States. It uses pesticides, herbicides, fertilizers imported from all over the place, hazardous to children and pets. So can we move from this, which is more of a user of fossil fuel, to something like this. This is suburban Chicago, and maybe you want to retain a small piece of land for your kids to play on, but you don't need the whole thing. So to me, you've got flowers, and you've got food, and you've got fruit trees, and you've got nut trees, and this piece of property in this neighborhood, the kids all come here because annual vegetables or trees, but what can you dig a little pond where you can have some fish in there all year. The pond actually does not need to be very deep to have fish all year round. Maybe those are perch or something that you want to eat, or maybe they're just friendly fish that look nice that you can have back there that can eat bugs. How can we use local resources to produce energy? So if we think about the corn and soy being used to produce energy, what about nut trees or nut species, or what are the other sources that we have locally to produce local energy for local needs rather than centralized energy that we're going to ship all over the place? We don't need as much to create as much energy at each local place than if we were trying to centralize it and ship it all over the world. And this is a shot from one of our next speaker's houses. This is what I call really local food. This is February. He's growing spinach in Illinois using what they call cold frame. So Elliot Coleman is really where most people turn to. He has a 4-season harvest is what his book is called. He talks all about how to develop and design these cold frame growing systems. He lives in Maine and grows food all year round. So if you think about, this climate is fairly similar to Michigan. In February, you can have fresh spinach without any energy expended. I mean, there's no heating in this. This is just right on the ground. So I want to take you guys through an example of how the permaculture people are starting to work with financial people as well, because we've heard some of these things from some of our talks already, but we're calling this as financial permaculture. So what this means is, how do we build and retain local wealth and skills in an area? How do we lower our expenses, save time and save money? And how do we really build communities of trust that are sustainable and beautiful? And what I try to do is go through one way that we could look at this for the Grand Traverse area or Traverse City, based on permaculture principles, trying to be married up with financial concepts. So a permaculture principle of observation. So what is already here? What is going on? I pulled this data. I picked some random address in Traverse City, and I did a 3-mile and a 5-mile circle around that random address in Traverse City. So this doesn't represent the whole city. But if you look at the total food spend at the bottom, $32 million total food spend, I would say likely that most of that is being sent out of the area for food that's imported from outside of Michigan. So that's something to note, that this is a pretty significant food spend, and how much of that is really from our local community. So permaculture principle of capturing and storing energy. Instead of letting energy leave our area and disperse, how do we retain that here? How do we keep that $32 million just within this 5-mile area from leaving the community? So how do we keep that wealth local and build up our local community wealth? Perhaps that's something with encouraging local farmers that are selling wholesale to sell more to local consumers. We heard from Cisco how those local farmers that are maybe selling wholesale out of the area could partner with Cisco now to keep that food local. Therefore, the person that's buying the food, the farmer is getting the money directly. The person that's paying the store, that money is staying here, and there's what's called a multiplier effect. So the more money that's spent locally on local items, the more wealth there is in an area, the more wealth there's going to be. How do we reuse food waste? So there's probably lots of restaurants and cafeterias. I don't know if there's a composting program up here for the city. Some cities are implementing composting programs and getting that compost or that food waste back to the farmers, because what we're doing today in conventional agriculture is we're taking a piece of soil, we're taking the food off that soil, we're shipping it off-site, and now we want to take, for cellulosic ethanol, we want to take all the waste product, the stubble from the wheat and the corn, and ship that off-site. Well, what's going back to the farmer's field in terms of fertilizer? So right now we're having to use fossil fuels to fertilize the land. Why don't we get that food waste back somehow to re-fertilize the land? So whether that's citywide composting or local composting,